Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel, and today we are going to be talking about some items that preppers, if at all possible, should buy now. We just entered fall a few days ago, and winter is going to be here before we know it. So there's some things that you want to have before winter hits, and also there are some things happening on the shipping side of things that makes it a good idea to go ahead and buy or stock up on particular items as quickly as possible. This list isn't going to really be in any particular order, but you know your own situation, you know what you have, what you don't have, and what you might need more of. And if there is something that I left off the list that could be useful to you in your situation or somebody else in a similar situation as you, go ahead and put that in the comments, because what I need in the southern United States with a relatively temperate temperature, and it's going to be way different than, say, somebody that lives in a coastal northern area like Maine or even the Pacific Northwest or even the Midwest. So go ahead and drop that in the comments below. And the first thing on this list is going to be a generator. For the last few weeks, I've looked at some solar generators, and of course those are great. But if you don't have the funds for one of those, there is nothing wrong with getting a gas generator if you have the funds for that. If you go that route, my recommendation would be a mid-sized generator, something that can generate somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 watts, preferably something that is dual fuel. That is the type of generator that I got a few months ago right after that Texas ice storm, and it can run on gasoline or propane. And the good thing about a generator of that size is it's going to allow you to power larger devices like your refrigerator and your box freezer probably at the same time, but it's not going to be a gas guzzling beast like the 10,000 watt generators. I wouldn't really recommend going much smaller than that, just because then you're only going to be able to really power smaller devices or charge up your phone. And then there's better ways to do that. Gas generators, they produce what's called dirty power. It fluctuates a lot. So if you're going to be using a generator primarily to power sensitive electronics, then it's best to get an inverter, but those tend to be more expensive per watt than a traditional gas generator. Now, if you cannot buy a full-size generator, if that's just something that you cannot do right now, then it's a good idea to go ahead and stock up on more batteries and then also battery banks, because unless you have a specialized adapter, a AAA or AA or even D cell battery, you're not going to be able to charge your cell phone easily with that. But if you have a few battery banks stored away like this one, at the very least you'll be able to keep your phone charged and you'll be able to communicate with the outside world for several days, which is a very big deal. If you do have a generator, I recommend getting some rechargeable batteries as well, since you can just top those off and then continue to use small devices like flashlights as you need to. The next thing that I recommend preppers go ahead and stock up on is going to be fuel sources. Of course, if you have a generator, and even for your car, it's a great idea to stock up on gasoline and rotate through it every few months. And then also propane. You can use propane to cook. You can use propane on heaters, and then also if you have a dual fuel generator, like what I mentioned a second ago, you can use those 20-pound propane tanks to power that. And also, along the lines of propane, get some of those 1-pound propane bottles if you have something like a camp stove that uses those. And then also, if you have a butane stove, pick up some of those. But the thing to realize about butane is it does not work well or at all at temperatures below freezing. If you have a wood-burning fireplace, go ahead and pick up some firewood. And if you have any oil lamps, go ahead and pick up some kerosene or lamp oil as well. The next thing that I recommend preppers pick up is going to be a heater, preferably one that does not rely on electricity. Probably the best option is going to be something like those Buddy heaters, either a regular Buddy or Big Buddy. They use those 1-pound propane tanks. And they're great for keeping small areas of your house warm, especially if you don't have something like a fireplace. They have decent safety features on them, like tip over protection, and I think some of them even have triggers on them that'll turn the device off if it detects levels of carbon monoxide. That being said, it's also good to have a carbon monoxide detector as well. Then if you have things like oil lamps or oil lanterns, pick up some extra wicks. And if you don't have those devices, maybe go ahead and get some. They're pretty cheap at most local stores. If you have time, the old ones are by far the best. Like if you can find some old Dietz lanterns, I think that's how you pronounce it, I'm not sure, but the old ones from like the 70s or before that were still made in the USA, those are excellent quality. But if you can't find older ones, Dietz is still a good brand, but I would recommend staying away from the super cheap ones because especially the Hurricane lanterns, they do have mechanical moving parts, and on the cheapies, that is going to be a pain in the butt to use because it's going to be little thin junky sheet metal. So try to pick up at least a name brand lantern like that. And then kind of along the same lines, if you have a propane lantern, go ahead and pick up some mantles for that. They're pretty cheap. You should be able to go into the camping section of like Walmart and find them pretty easy. Then of course there's your local sporting goods store as well. This next one might be something that maybe you haven't thought about, or if you live in an area with a cold climate, you probably have this stuff anyway. But if you're somewhere in the south like I am, winter tools, things like snow shovels, ice chippers, those are going to be things that we don't really use all that much, so it's not really at the front of our mind to go pick those up. But when you need them, nothing else will do the job like they will. You can think that you can chip ice with a shovel. Well, you can, but it's a gigantic pain in the rear, and shoveling snow with a regular shovel is just a nightmare. So what I went ahead and did is I ordered a snow shovel and an ice chipper online. And also kind of a specialty tool that I picked up is a battery-operated heat gun. I can't tell you how many times I have gone outside, had big long extension cord hook up to a hair dryer, and then tried to thaw out my spigots. And it worked, but it was a pain in the butt. So I went ahead and I picked up one of those battery-operated heat guns so that A, I don't have to fool with extension cords anymore every time my exterior faucets freeze, because they always do. And then also if there's a power outage, I don't have to worry about A, not being able to do that, or B, having to bring out one of my like solar power stations out there and risk getting that all wet and messed up. But if you're using a heat gun for that purpose, you do have to be extremely careful because they can generate way more heat than something like a hair dryer can. You also want to avoid using a direct flame like from a propane torch because that can damage the pipes. But heat guns, they do get hot enough to melt vinyl siding. If there's anything made of natural materials like wood, then it can light that stuff on fire. You do need to be extremely careful when using a device like that. And I mean, while those things can get really hot, if you want to avoid putting too much heat at once, of course, you can just pull the heat gun a little bit further away and be careful with how you angle that so it'll be less likely to damage your home or pipes. Then, of course, this is also a great time to go ahead and keep stocking up on food. That's something that preppers should always be doing. But picking up things like canned goods, that's a great idea right now. And then even, I mean, I know a lot of us are preparing for kind of a grid down thing where we don't necessarily want to rely on power, but there's a good chance that the things we're going to deal with this year, especially in like kind of along the lines of shortages, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and pick up some meat to put in your freezer. Now, as far as meat shortages, try to find your local butchers. There might be a situation where maybe they're able to procure meat differently than what your big box stores are. That's something that my family and I experienced back in 2020 when everybody was buying everything off of the shelves. We have a local butcher shop that still had meat, given it was more expensive, and There were times when they didn't have things, but our success rate buying from them was far greater. You also have to keep in mind that since we live in Texas, there are a lot of places around here that raise cattle. There's a town not too far from us. I mean, they are basically a chicken farming town. So maybe if you live in an area that's less agricultural, maybe you might not have as much success, but it is an excellent idea that if you have them around, try to find those local butcher shops, try to build relationships with them so that maybe you can get some meat at times when it's not on the shelves in those big box stores. If you're a hunter, this might be a good time to be a little bit less choosy towards the beginning of the season. I know deer season's opening up here. It probably is other places as well. So, I mean, maybe this year, maybe be more of a food hunter than a trophy hunter, so at least you have some food in the freezer ready to go. And then, of course, if you're able to, freeze-dried foods are great as well. And then the next thing that preppers should probably stock up on is medications, particularly things like cold and flu medications, because it being the time of year that it is, those are going to be the things that you are most likely to need. So get you those fever reducers. Tylenol's great. And then also get some stuff for gastrointestinal illnesses, things like Imodium, Pepto, and then also don't overlook Pedialyte. Pedialyte is an electrolyte solution. A lot of times you can find it back where they have like baby food and baby medicines and stuff like that, but it's good for older people too. If you have vomiting and diarrhea, you're using a lot of fluids. I know, gross. But that Pedialyte, it's easy on your stomach, it's easier to keep down than some other things, and it replaces those fluids. Because what makes people really sick when they have some sort of gastrointestinal thing is the dehydration that follows. Make sure you're able to get your prescriptions, and then also it's a good idea to stock up on first aid items as well in case you cut your hand or have some other moderate boo-boo and you're snowed in and you can't get to the doctor. It's also a good time to pick up things like clothes, particularly stuff like winter weather boots that are maybe specialized items that they don't have all year, but it being fall, being hunting season, they're probably getting those things in stock, so you want to get them while they still have them. Then also kind of an oddball thing, tires and anything you would need to repair your vehicle, particularly if your vehicle is up for inspection. You probably want to get that taken care of just in case there is an issue. You don't want to be in a situation where you need a part to get your car inspected and your registration renewed, and then you can't get that part because it's sitting on a container ship in the Pacific. It's also a good idea to stock up on some water. You don't want to depend on outdoor water sources during the winter simply because they can freeze. You can do things as simple as buying a few packages of bottled water and rotating through them. I personally like to have water containers that I can store stuff in and then rotate it out as needed. And then also having some ability to filter water in case the cold weather results in a boil water notice. That's the reason why I bought that Sawyer tap filter, although I figured out a lot of other ways to use that. And honestly, I have done so many videos over water storage and filtration that if I do one more, I'm going to probably have to change my name to Bobby Boucher. So if you want to learn more about that, I'll be sure to put a card up for the water filtration video and then put a couple more in the description below for you. And another thing that I recommend that preppers pick up, even though it's not necessarily a prepper item, is going to be Christmas gifts. Considering all the problems with shipping and then the workforce that we've had this past year, there's a very good chance that when people are trying to have things shipped to them in mass and then trying to transport larger quantities of products than what we're trying to do now, I think it's going to put a big strain on the supply line. So go ahead and at least pick up some things for your little ones. I have a 2-year-old, and that's what my wife and I are going to do. We're going to start picking up things now. We're not going to put as much stock in Black Friday because the further we go along, the more strain that's put on the system. I really do see things getting more difficult to get, and shipping times becoming much longer if you choose to go the online route. And then the last thing, if you do not have a way to cook indoors, that is a big deal if it's a winter power outage. It could be a big blizzard outside, you could be snowed in, maybe you can't even get out of your house. You want to have some way that you can cook indoors, and you can check that out by clicking this video here. Y'all have a good one.